Mobutu Sese Seko's visits to Kenya, Lions on the African Stage. Introduction, Shadows and Footprints of Power. The 1970s in Africa were a time of contradictions, hope and despair, independence and dependency, flamboyant leaders, and oppressed populations. Amid the turbulence of the Cold War, Africa became a chessboard where leaders sought to assert sovereignty while courting global powers. Two names stood out: Joseph-Désiré Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire and Mzee Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya. Though their nations were thousands of miles apart, their fates were intertwined by geography, diplomacy, and the weight of history. Mobutu, youthful and flamboyant with his trademark leopard skin hat, embodied a new Africa trying to carve its own identity through authenticity. Kenyatta, the elder statesman, carried the scars of colonial imprisonment and the triumph of independence. When they met, it was more than a courtesy, it was the convergence of two lions of Africa, shaping the destiny of their people. Mobutu's three recorded visits to Kenya in the 1970s, February 1971, December 1974, and July 1977, reveal a fascinating portrait of diplomacy, symbolism, and survival. Each meeting was a snapshot in time, but together they tell a deeper story about Africa's struggles under Cold War pressures, internal contradictions, and the search for continental brotherhood. Episode 1, February 4th, 1971. Mombasa Meeting by the Sea. Mobutu's first documented stop in Kenya came at a moment of transition. He had consolidated power in Zaire after his 1965 coup and the subsequent crushing of rebellions. By 1971, Mobutu was recasting his nation with sweeping programs of centralization and cultural nationalism. On his way back from Sudan, he touched down in Nairobi, and the choreography of African diplomacy unfolded. At Nairobi Airport, Mobutu was met by Vice President Daniel Arap Moi and Foreign Minister Dr. Njoroge Mungai. The cameras captured the details: the aircraft taxiing, Moi's stern composure, Mungai's diplomatic polish. These images were monial. They symbolized Kenya's recognition of Zaire as a partner in regional stability. Mobutu then boarded another plane for Mombasa, where President Jomo Kenyatta was spending a working holiday. This setting carried poetic weight. Mombasa, the coastal gateway of East Africa, had for centuries been a crossroads of trade, conquest, and diplomacy. To host Mobutu there was to place him within Africa's ancient traditions of negotiation under the palm trees and ocean winds. Waiting with Kenyatta was Finance Minister Mwai Kibaki, the future president of Kenya, then still a young technocrat navigating the world of post-colonial economics. The symbolism was thick: a leader in his twilight, Kenyatta, one at the height of flamboyant rule, Mobutu, and another still rising, Kibaki. The private talks between Kenyatta and Mobutu were never fully disclosed, but historical context provides clues. Both nations were navigating Cold War alignments, resisting communist infiltration while courting Western aid. They likely discussed trade, security, and the unrest simmering in East and Central Africa. For Mobutu, whose Zaire was still fragile, Kenyatta's Kenya offered a model of relative stability and international legitimacy. For Kenyatta, welcoming Mobutu was both strategic and symbolic, a reinforcement of Kenya's leadership role in East Africa. Emotionally, this meeting carried undertones of kinship, but also caution. Mobutu was younger, brash, and known for consolidating power with ruthless efficiency. Kenyatta, though authoritarian in his own right, carried himself with elder statesman dignity. Their embrace in Mombasa was thus not just diplomatic, but symbolic of an intergenerational bond within Africa's leadership. Episode 2, December 5th, 1974, between Beijing and Nairobi. By 1974, Mobutu's world had grown more complicated. Zaire's Authenticité program, banning Western names, suits, and customs in favor of African traditions, had drawn both admiration and skepticism. Mobutu presented himself as the defender of African dignity, but critics whispered of corruption, extravagance, and repression. On December 5th, 1974, Mobutu made a private stop in Kenya while en route to China and North Korea. The Reuters footage shows him descending from the aircraft, greeted by officials and crowds. Flags waved, handshakes exchanged, smiles practiced for the cameras. On the surface, it was a routine diplomatic courtesy. Yet beneath, it symbolized Africa's delicate balancing act between East and West. That Mobutu would stop in capitalist Kenya while heading to communist Asia spoke volumes. Africa was not merely a pawn in the Cold War, its leaders played their own game of survival. Mobutu, though a staunch ally of the United States and France, also cultivated ties with Mao Zedong and Kim Il sung. This was not betrayal but strategy, a means to extract aid, recognition, and legitimacy from both sides. Kenyatta's Kenya represented the opposite pole, firmly pro Western, a trusted partner of Britain and the US. Hosting Mobutu, therefore, was a demonstration of Kenya's neutrality within African affairs. For Mobutu, stopping in Nairobi reinforced his image as a continental leader who could bridge ideological divides. The emotional resonance of this visit lies in the spectacle of contradiction. Mobutu, who would be feted in Beijing for anti imperial rhetoric, smiled in Nairobi as if rehearsing for a different stage. Kenyatta, increasingly frail by the mid 1970s, represented continuity, a reminder that Africa's elder leaders still carried immense symbolic weight. It was as if Nairobi itself had become a corridor of history, a resting point between continents, ideologies, and destinies. The flags fluttering at the airport carried more than color. They carried the fragile hopes of nations trying to chart their course through stormy global seas. Episode 3, July 24th, 1977, Return from the Arab World. By July 1977, Africa's political landscape had darkened further. Mobutu returned through Nairobi after 3 days of talks with Sudanese and Saudi leaders. His aircraft touched down at Nairobi Airport, where Foreign Minister Dr. Munyua Wayaki and other Kenyan officials awaited him. The scene was familiar: handshakes, ceremonial greetings, smiles for the cameras. Yet behind the choreography lay deeper shadows. Zaire was now sliding into economic crisis, its copper-dependent economy weakened by global shocks. Kenya, though still relatively stable, was entering an uncertain period as President Kenyatta's health deteriorated and succession struggles brewed beneath the surface. Mobutu's talks with Saudi Arabia had likely centered on oil, aid, and solidarity within the Muslim world, even though Zaire was largely Christian. His meeting with Sudan reflected the search for regional alliances in a time of instability. Stopping again in Nairobi was not just convenience, it was necessity. Kenya remained a trusted ally, a safe harbor, and a platform of legitimacy. The emotional depth of this visit lies in the contrast between the spectacle and the reality. Mobutu's leopard skin hat and regal demeanor masked a leader grappling with the fragility of his empire. The Kenyan ministers who greeted him represented a nation about to lose its founding father. Both countries, in their own ways, stood at the threshold of transition. Emotional analysis, brotherhood and burden. Across these three visits, 1971, 1974, 1977, a pattern emerges. Kenya served as Mobutu's constant partner, a staging ground for diplomacy, a place of rest, and a symbol of continuity. The figures who appear beside him, Moi, Mungai, Kibaki, Wayaki, represent Kenya's own journey from colonial struggle to post-colonial governance. The encounters were deeply symbolic. Kenyatta, the elder lion, carried history's weight. Mobutu, the flamboyant younger lion, roared with ambition and fear. Their interactions conveyed fraternity, but beneath was the loneliness of power. For African leaders, handshakes were not just greetings. They were affirmations of survival in a world where coups, assassinations, and betrayals were daily threats. The Kenyan coastal breeze in 1971, the flags of Nairobi in 1974, the ceremonial greetings of 1977, these were not empty rituals. They were moments where Africa's destiny was written in gestures, silences, and shared glances. Conclusion: the footprints on Kenya's soil. Mobutu's visits to Kenya were not accidents of travel. They were deliberate steps in his performance of power. Each arrival at Nairobi Airport, each handshake with Kenyan leaders, each embrace with Kenyatta carried layers of meaning. They symbolized alliances, tested loyalties, and the broader African struggle to navigate independence under global pressure. In the end, Mobutu's Zaire would collapse under the weight of corruption, war, and betrayal, while Kenya would stumble forward into its own struggles of succession and democracy. Yet the images remain. Mobutu descending from aircraft steps, Kenyatta greeting him by the sea, flags waving, crowds watching. History is often written in speeches and treaties, but it also lives in fleeting moments. A handshake at an airport, a breeze off the ocean, a glance exchanged between two lions of Africa. Mobutu Sese Seko's footprints on Kenyan soil remind us that Africa's leaders carried not only power, but also immense burdens. And in their meetings, they revealed the fragile hope of a continent in search of its destiny.